Lou Jean woke to the smell of burning pine needles and dried mugwort. There was no silk bedding, no humming arrays of spiritual stones, and no sterile scent of a sect infirmary. When his eyelids flicked open, heavy as wet clay, he stared up at a ceiling made of rotting thatch and exposed timber. He was home. Jean? Oh, praise the ancestors, your eyes are open. A small, frantic face leaned into his blurred field of vision. It was Xiaoyan. Her hair was tied back in her usual messy braids, her face smudged with soot from the kitchen hearth. Her eyes were red, puffy, and wide with a mixture of terror and absolute relief. Jean tried to speak, but his throat felt like it had been scraped with broken glass. A dry, pathetic croak was all that came out. "Don't move, don't try to talk," a heavier, gravelly voice commanded from the side. His father, Lu Chong, stepped into the firelight. The old man looked like he had aged a decade in a single night. His hands, rough and permanently stained from farm work, trembled as he held a wooden bowl of lukewarm water. "The sect disciples dumped you at the village gates before dawn yesterday, Jean. They said you were a coward who got caught in a bee stampede. They didn't even leave a copper coin for medicine." A cold spike of bitterness pierced Jin's chest. Coward? Stampede? Zhao had already rewritten the story to save his own skin. His father gently lifted Jin's head, trickling the water past his chapped lips. As the moisture hit his throat, Jin's mind cleared slightly. He expected to feel the agonizing fire of shredded flesh, but as he looked down at his torso, he blinked in confusion. The deep, jagged tears from the alpha wolf's claws were wrapped in clean, coarse rags, but the bleeding had completely stopped. Underneath the bandages, his skin didn't feel hot or infected. In fact, deep within his chest, right where Senior Zhao's palm strikes had battered him for months, a strange, dense warmth was pulsing. It felt like a cold hearth that had suddenly captured a single, stubborn ember. The stray spiritual energy from the dying wolves and the raw qi Zhao had hammered into him over the weeks hadn't dissipated. His compressed, brutalized bones had trapped it. He wasn't healed, but his body was rebuilding itself out of denser, tougher material. "The village elder said we should prepare the shroud," Xiaoyan whispered, gripping Jin's hand tightly with her small fingers. But father refused. He stayed up all night, boiling the bitter roots we had left over from winter. Lu Chong turned his back, wiping his face with a ragged sleeve so his son wouldn't see him break. "We are poor, Jean. We cannot afford a sect healer to mend your meridians. If you cannot return to the sect, if you are crippled—" "I'm not," Jean rasped, his voice raw but firm. He squeezed Xiaoyan's hand back. It hurt, but the grip was solid. "I'm not crippled, father." 3 days after being dumped at the edge of the village, Lu Jean was already out of bed. He didn't have the luxury of a long recovery. In the outer mortal villages, an idle mouth was a direct threat to the winter rations. Walking hurt, every joint felt as though it had been packed with coarse sand. But Jean was realistic. He knew Zhao had stolen his achievements, locked the sect gates behind him, and branded him a coward. He knew nobody was coming to fix this. "If the world is going to treat me like a dog," Jean thought, leaning heavily against the wooden post of the woodcutter's shed, "I might as well make sure I'm the kind of dog that bites back when stepped on." He picked up the family's old nicked iron axe. His palms were raw, the skin peeling where the wolf claws had grazed his wrists. But as his fingers closed around the worn hickory handle, a strange sensation hummed through his forearms. The skin didn't tear. The flesh felt thick, dense, and oddly cold. A massive trunk of ironwood, notoriously stubborn, heavy timber, sat on the chopping block. Normally, splitting a single log of this size took Gene 20 minutes of exhausting, back-breaking labor. He raised the axe, drawing a ragged breath into his lungs. As he did, the trapped, chaotic knot of energy in his chest, the leftover spiritual force from the wolves and Zhao's heavy strikes, shifted. It didn't flow smoothly like the elegant chi paths taught in the sect manuals. It surged forward like mud through a pipe, forcing its way down into his shoulders and wrists. Gene swung. Thwack! The iron blade didn't just bite into the wood. It sheared completely through the ironwood trunk, burying itself 3 inches deep into the heavy oak chopping block beneath it. The log split into 2 perfect clean halves with a sound like a small thunderclap. Gene stumbled back, staring at his hands. His shoulders didn't ache. His joints hadn't popped. The blunt, heavy impact hadn't rattled his teeth the way it usually did. Instead, his dense bones seemed to absorb the entire vibration, neutralizing it instantly. Well, Gene muttered, a dry, cynical smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. At least if I'm banned from the heavens, I'll be the fastest woodcutter in the province. Zhao would probably charge the outer disciples 3 spiritual stones for a technique that ugly. High above, sitting cross-legged on a silver cloud with her chin resting in her hands, May let out a massive sigh of relief. Honestly, the nerve of that white-silked coward, she grumbled, glaring down through her scrying pool of the Iron Fist sect outpost in the distance. Changing the records? Calling this mortal a coward? If I could throw a lightning bolt without the heavenly overseers executing me, I'd roast that boy Zhao like a pig. She looked back at the small, drafty mud hut where Gene was resting. Her celestial eyes could see what the mortal father and the low-grade village doctors couldn't. Gene's physical frame hadn't collapsed. The sheer, repetitive trauma of his daily beatings had acted like a blacksmith's hammer, and the desperate struggle in the canyon had quenched the metal. His foundation is as ugly and chaotic as a pile of scrap iron, May murmured, a small, proud smile tugging at her lips. But it is thick. If he can just figure out how to circulate that trapped energy without a master, those arrogant inner disciples are going to have a very difficult time knocking him down next time. She adjusted her robes and settled in. The mortal world thought Lu Jin was a broken pawn sent home to die. She knew the show was just getting started. She had spent the last 2 hours carefully monitoring the spiritual pressure around the Lu family hut. To ensure he didn't accidentally blow his own arms off with that volatile wolf chi, she had subtly increased the weight of the atmospheric pressure right above his chopping block by a fraction of a percent. It wasn't enough to notice consciously, but it forced Gene to exert twice as much internal force to move his arms, effectively acting as an invisible mold to shape his chaotic internal energy. Keep chopping, little mortal, May grinned, a mischievous spark in her eyes. The local overseer's lackeys are currently walking down the main road to collect the summer grain tax, and they are notorious for stealing extra. Let's see how much you can split before they get here. The heavy thud of iron-shod boots signaled their arrival before they even cleared the fence. 3 men stepped into the Lu family courtyard. They wore the reinforced leather jerkins of the local magistrate's tax collectors. Men paid a pittance by the province, who made up the difference by squeezing the blood out of the outer villages. The leader was a burly man named Gung, a failed outer disciple of a minor sect who carried a heavy wooden staff wrapped in copper wire. Lu Chong, Gung bellowed, spitting a glob of yellow tobacco juice onto the clean dirt path. The summer quota has risen. 3 extra sacks of millet, or 2 silver pieces for the magistrate's emergency defense fund. Lu Jin's father stumbled out of the mud hut, his hands raised in a pleading gesture. Master Gung, please. The sect took my son's entire stipend when they sent him back. We barely have enough grain to survive the month, let alone 3 extra sacks. Look at him. He is crippled. Gung glanced over at Jean, who was sitting on a 3-legged stool by the woodpile, quietly stacking the ironwood he had just split. A cruel, bored smirk crossed the collector's face. The 2 thugs grinned, pulling heavy pine clubs from their belts. They didn't use chi. They didn't need to for mere peasants. They walked up to Jean, who didn't even bother to stand up. He just watched them with a dead, deeply cynical expression. Of course, Jean thought, a dark streak of humor running through his mind. It's always the same. If it's not an arrogant disciple at the sect, it's a bunch of bullies at home. I can't even catch my breath. The first thug swung his club down hard, aiming directly for Jin's collarbone. Crack! The pine club struck Jean's shoulder with enough force to shatter seasoned timber. But instead of the sound of breaking bone, there was only a dull, heavy thud, like hitting a sack of dense river clay. Jean didn't even flinch. His dense, micro-fractured bones, hardened by months of Zhao's superior spiritual palm strikes, barely registered the impact. To a body that had been conditioned by core-level chi, a simple wooden club felt like being batted with a rolled-up scroll. The thug blinked, his wrist stinging from the rebound vibration. What the? Is that it? Jean asked, his voice entirely flat. He tilted his head, looking up at the confused thug. You need to put your hip into it. Like this. Before the man could react, Jean reached out, grabbed the thug's shirt, and pulled him forward while rising from his stool. He didn't use a martial technique. He just used the raw, compacted leverage of his body. The thug flew over Jin's shoulder, crashing hard into the dirt and knocking the wind out of his lungs. The second thug lunged, swinging his club horizontally at Jin's ribs. Jean didn't dodge. He let the club strike his side, using the impact to test the limits of his new frame. The wood shattered into splinters against his ribs, sending a strange, tingling warmth through his internal pathways. The kinetic force was instantly sucked in by his greedy, stubborn meridians, compressing the volatile wolf chi even further. It's working, Jean realized, a sudden, wild spark of understanding lighting up his mind. The beatings, they aren't just hurting me anymore. They're hammering the energy into place. It's all just extra training. Leader Gung's jaw dropped, so low it looked unhinged. He stared at the shattered pieces of the pine club spinning through the dirt, then at Lu Jin, who was still casually standing there, rolling his shoulders as if he'd just received a mildly stiff massage. What kind of demonic herb did you swallow, boy? Gung snarled, his cowardice instantly masquerading as fury. He gripped his copper-wrapped staff with both hands. I don't care how tough your skin is. Let's see if your head holds up to a real martial strike. Gung stepped forward, channeling his pathetic excuse for chi. A faint, muddy brown glow coated the copper wiring of his staff. He swung it in a vicious downward arc, aiming straight for Jean's temple. Up in the clouds, May's fingers danced. Slow down just a hair, she thought, flicking a microscopic bead of spiritual pressure right into the path of Gung's swing. To Gung, it felt like swinging his staff through thick, heavy syrup for a split second. His perfect alignment broke. To Jean, the movement looked incredibly sloppy. Because Gung's strike slowed down just enough, Jean didn't have to try and dodge, which was good because his clumsy, untrained feet probably would have tripped over his own stool. Instead, Gene simply raised his left arm, bracing his dense, iron wood-conditioned forearm to take the blow. Bang! The copper-wrapped staff collided with Jin's arm. The sound wasn't the wet thud of hitting flesh. It was the sharp, metallic ring of a blacksmith's hammer striking a solid anvil. The vibration tore up Gung's arms, splitting the skin between his thumb and forefinger. He gasped, dropping the staff as if it had turned into white-hot iron. He stumbled backward, clutching his bleeding hands to his chest, staring at Gene with pure, unadulterated horror. Gene looked down at his arm. There was a faint, red smudge where the copper had hit, but beneath the skin, the chaotic, painful knot of wolf chi in his chest suddenly loosened. It flowed smoothly down his arm, filling the microfractures in his bones and solidifying them. The pain was gone. In its place was a dull, heavy power. He's right, Gene thought, looking from his glowing skin back to the terrified tax collector. A slow, genuinely amused smile spread across his face. They really are just free labor. If I let them beat on me for another 10 minutes, I might actually fix my whole left shoulder. Gene took a slow, deliberate step forward. You stopped, he said, his voice laced with mock disappointment. Come on, Master Gung. What about the Magistrate's Emergency Defense Fund? Aren't you going to teach me a lesson? Demon, you're a cultivation demon, Gung shrieked. He didn't even bother picking up his expensive copper staff. He turned on his heel, grabbed his groaning, bruised thug from the dirt, and scrambled out of the courtyard like a startled rabbit, their boots kicking up a massive cloud of dust as they fled down the village road. Silence returned to the small farmyard. Lu Jin's father, Lu Chong, slowly let his hands drop to his sides. He looked at the shattered wood, the abandoned copper staff, and then at his son, who was currently picking up his old iron axe to finish splitting the timber. Gene, Lu Chong whispered, his voice trembling. Gene didn't look up from the log he was aligning. He raised the axe, feeling the dense, heavy warmth in his muscles working in perfect tandem with his breath. They gave me a very thorough education, father, Gene said softly, bringing the axe down with a clean, effortless split. And I think it's time I started using it.